Hey everyone, it's time for some NFL playoff predictions. Boy, am I excited for this season's playoffs. Even though, yet again, my team is not involved, I always do really enjoy the NFL playoffs. I feel like it's a really good single elimination tournament that really brings out the best or the worst in some players, and that's specifically apparent in the current state of the NFL. It really is the haves and the have-nots. So many players put up great, phenomenal numbers in the regular season but cannot perform in the playoffs. Of course, a new year means new opportunities to try and buck the trend and, well, perform in the postseason. Of course, let's just jump right into it. So here is the full bracket. I'm going to move my camera to the middle here so you guys can go ahead and get a nice read on this. So you got the AFC on the left and the NFC on the right. Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, Houston, the LA Chargers, Pittsburgh, and Denver. Those are your 7 teams in the AFC, seeded 1 to 7 as it is in the bracket. And in the NFC, Detroit, Philadelphia, Tampa Bay, Los Angeles Rams, Minnesota, Washington, and Green Bay, the 7 teams representing the NFC. Much more of a disparity in the records on the NFC side of things this season than in the AFC. But still, I'm really looking forward to this postseason nonetheless. Should be interesting. Of course, all the list is listed in seeding, so division winners get higher seeds than wildcard teams. If you are still confused on why a 14-3 Minnesota is below a 10-7 LA. But anyways, let's jump straight into the actual predictions. It's time for the AFC. We'll start with the AFC. Here's your bracket. Full bracket. KC gets the bye, beating the number 1 seed in the conference. We're going to start up in the top left with number 5 LA, number 4 Houston. On the road, the Chargers, 11-6, the top wild card team in the conference. 4th best team overall. And I think that Houston's just been stumbling throughout the latter half of the season. They've really struggled, and I think the Chargers are going to get the job done with Jim Harbaugh as their head coach. They've been playing tight. They've been playing much better football. They're a much better coach than the last time they were in the playoffs, which, of course, if people remember, they blew a 27-0 lead. They're hoping that does not happen today, or, well, tomorrow, as I'm recording this on Friday. So, unsurprisingly, I have the Chargers advancing in this postseason to go on the road to Kansas City. Moving on, you have this divisional matchup in the AFC North. 2 bitter rivals, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. The 3rd time they've met this season. It's been a thing for Lamar Jackson. Struggle to beat the Steelers, or just the Ravens in general. John Harbaugh has really struggled to beat Pittsburgh as of late. But they get a huge win late in the season at home. And the Steelers are really stumbling into the postseason. They're on a 4-game losing streak, which a loss to Baltimore is in that streak. Now, granted, that was a bit of a tough schedule. Philadelphia, Baltimore, Kansas City, and Cincinnati playing for their playoff lives. But regardless, a 4-game losing streak is a 4-game losing streak. I don't think it's going to be a blowout like some people do think it will be. I think it's going to be close. But I think in the end, Baltimore does have the better overall team to get the job done and move on to the second round. Then you move down to this game between the Bills and the Broncos. In Buffalo, I think it's the easiest call of the postseason of the first round, in my opinion. I'm very proud of what the Denver Broncos have done this season. They have shut me up. I didn't think they were going to be that good. I thought they didn't really have that great of a team. But of course, coaching matters, and the coach has elevated the team's performance enough to make it to the postseason for the first time since they won the Super Bowl back in 2015. And, I would like to see this one be competitive. I think that there are quite a few people who are expecting this to be a blowout, a bit of a rout. I hope it's close. But I do not have enough confidence in that Broncos offense to pick up a playoff win, especially on the road against a Bills team that has played very well all season. I got the Bills in this one. And so we've reached the divisional round. Los Angeles, Kansas City, in Arrowhead. I think it's going to be really good. I think their two matchups this season in the regular season were both pretty good. One possession games. Chiefs ended up winning at the end, holding on, especially in that second game in Kansas City where the Chiefs ended up clinching the AFC West. I think it's going to be a little bit different this time around. This is going to be a tough call. A little tougher than some people might think, but it's really hard. It's been really hard to bet against the Chiefs this season with just the ways that they've just been able to find ways to win. Despite sometimes being outplayed, they're still finding ways to win at the end. And so I have Kansas City moving on and hosting the AFC Championship game for, I think, the sixth time in 7 years. I think that's what it'll be with this, which is just unheard of. So the AFC Championship's back in Kansas City. Who will they face? This is going to be really interesting. I hope that this is the divisional matchup. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. Maybe the MVP on the line. They met in the regular season in Baltimore, and the Ravens thoroughly dominated the Bills. But now they got to go to Buffalo. Josh Allen's been playing phenomenal. Lamar Jackson's been playing phenomenal. Both teams are very complete. It's a very, very tough call. I think this is going to be one of the best games of the entire playoffs. It may have the biggest stakes because both these quarterbacks know. Who knows when the schedule comes out for the divisional round if KC plays first. But if the Chiefs end up winning and the Bills-Ravens game is after that Chiefs game, both these quarterbacks know that they're going to have to go up against Mahomes, which has been their Achilles heel for their entire careers. So both will get the right to play Patrick Mahomes in the AFC title game. It's going to be really close. I think this is a perfect matchup in the divisional round. But I think the Ravens are a bit more of a complete team. They've stumbled a couple times this season, which has led them to getting the 3 seed. But I think the Ravens will travel to Arrowhead for the AFC title game. It's going to be a rematch, but they're swapping locations. So I'm going to jump ahead to the NFC instead of announcing who I think's winning the AFC title game this year, because I'm going to wait to get the NFC title game set up and then talk about the championship games and then the Super Bowl. So we're going to go through the NFC playoffs right now. Here's your bracket. This is a very interesting bracket. I think the NFC is very competitive this year. I think there is a good chance that all 7 of these teams can make a run. There's a lot to like about the NFC playoff picture this season. We're going to start in the top left again with a Vikings-Rams game that I'm really looking forward to. Now, I'm recording this after the game has been announced to be moved to be played in Phoenix, Arizona at the Cardinals Stadium due to the Palisades fire. I think that's how you pronounce it. So it's really tough for the Rams. This was a huge get for them to be able to play this game at home. The Rams had beaten the Vikings earlier this season at home. They're the only team to beat the Vikings not named the Detroit Lions. And those could be the first 2 teams the Vikings play in the playoffs, by the way. So I think that this is going to be really interesting and a bit more of an interesting matchup than some people may initially think of. The Rams are playing very well. The Vikings had a just terrible performance in Detroit with the division on the line. And now they're going to have to play most likely 2 playoff games on the road. This one intrigues me a lot. It's a 4-win difference between the 2 teams. And despite all the talk about maybe the Rams have a chance here and whatnot, blah, 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 I still can't pick against the 14-3 Minnesota Vikings. I mean, 14-3. And now that you take the Rams out of their home stadium due to just a freak accident that's just absolutely terrible, it really hinders the Rams in this one. I'm taking the Vikings to move on. Now we get to what I think is the biggest toss-up in the entire bracket. This is going to be the biggest toss-up of the first round, maybe the biggest toss-up of the entire postseason, depending on what matchups work their way out and everything. I was mulling over this decision for a good 10, 15 minutes. This thing is hard to call. If this game is in Washington, I'd be leaning for Washington pretty comfortably. But with it being in Tampa, it provides a very, very intriguing matchup. Tampa was 10-7, yes. But they have wins over the top two teams in the NFC in Detroit and Philadelphia. They won against Detroit at Detroit as well. But they've also struggled against some other teams. They lost the Cowboys late. Now, granted, Washington also has a loss against the Cowboys this season. So there's a lot. Tampa has gotten in their own way a couple times. They've lost a couple games they frankly shouldn't have. But they've played competitive football all season long. And frankly, if the NFC South wanted to have any sort of competitor in the playoffs this year, it had to have been Tampa Bay. Michael Penix has done great stuff in Atlanta the last couple weeks. But we all know that if the Falcons had made the playoffs, they were probably going to get thoroughly stomped. So, anyways, I like what Washington's done all year long. They've continuously surprised me over and over and over again. Jaden Daniels has looked great. I think it's a very, very good situation right now, which is something that not a lot of people were saying before the season. Thinking, okay, Daniels will have some flashes, but I don't think the team itself is that good to make sure that they get to the playoffs. But obviously, that isn't the case. Washington went 12-5. They had a phenomenal season. And I think it's going to continue. I think they win it. I think they win on the road in Tampa. It's really close. It's a really big toss-up, but I would not be surprised in the slightest if Tampa goes out and wins. Tampa, well, they've played some really dominating games down the stretch against weaker teams. Some of these games, they've also let some teams hang in. So I think that to me is where I feel that if they let the Commanders hang around in this one, I think Washington ends up winning, and that's what's going to happen, in my opinion. And finally, we go to Philadelphia with a rematch from a Week 1 thriller all the way down south in Brazil between the Packers and the Eagles. They finally get to play in Philadelphia after their, scheduled matchup in the regular season got moved to Brazil. That was a really good matchup. And that one made me a little frustrated because Green Bay should have had this game, had that game pretty much, not necessarily won, but they should have been in control of that football game in the first half. The Philadelphia Eagles had a very sluggish start to that game in Brazil, and the Packers could not capitalize. The Packers are also coming off a 2-game losing streak to their two most hated rivals in the Vikings and the Bears. The Eagles sat a lot of their starters this past week against the Giants, and a lot of starters sat against the Cowboys. Or, a couple of them. No. Really, only Jalen Hurts was hurt. So, that's really more what happened there. I lied. But, of course, Green Bay having Christian Watson go down against Chicago really hurts because it's an ACL tear. It's not just a minor injury. Jordan Love looked like he's going to be fine. I didn't think that he was going to be out long-term when he left that game against Chicago. But I think that with the Packers in this situation again, in the 2-7 game, going on the road, they thoroughly surprised Dallas by dominating them in absolutely every single way. I don't think it's going to happen again. I got Philly winning at home against Green Bay. They're slumping into the playoffs this year, it looks like, as opposed to going in really hot. And Philly 14-3. They've looked really good, man. They've looked like a really complete NFL team. And it's like they lost, 2 games in the first 4 weeks, and their only other loss this season is to Washington, where, they frankly they should have won that game too. So I like what Philly's done this season. There were a lot of people thinking that after their collapse last year, they were going to be a bad team. I wasn't buying into it. And they've proven that last year's collapse was really more of a fluke than anything. They rallied the troops and got them back to a really, really good spot in the postseason. So you may notice something about this bracket here. One, there's 2 divisional matchups between the Vikings and Lions and Commanders and Eagles. Great matchups, right? Yes, but the bracket's wrong. There is a reseed, so it looks like this because Detroit would host the lowest winning seed, which is Washington, number 6. So Washington would head to Detroit. Minnesota out to Philly. So, speaking of Commanders-Lions, Jaden Daniels gets a chance to go play in Detroit after picking up a playoff win. This would really intrigue me. I would really like to see this matchup, honestly. This would be really cool to see what Jaden Daniels can do against the elite in the NFL. But, of course, the big question for the Lions, they prepare for what is their best chance at the Super Bowl in franchise history. How is their defense going to respond, with all the injuries? Them getting the bye week is huge to try and get a couple guys healthy. They're also it looks like they're going to get David Montgomery back as well, so they'll have Sonic and Knuckles in the backfield. I think that the Lions' offense has been so effective this season that regardless of the injuries on that Lions defense, I think it's going to be enough. It could be a shootout, but it will be enough, and the Lions will go host their first ever NFC Championship game. And so then we get Minnesota-Philadelphia. 2 14-3 teams. The Vikings have 2 losses to the Lions and a loss to the Rams, who they just beat in the wild card round in this scenario. And then the Eagles, honestly, they get to avoid Washington, who they lost to, Tampa, who they lost to, and then the other team that they lost to, Atlanta, isn't even in the field. So, but at the same time, they get to play a 14-3 Vikings team. Now, I don't know how that performance in Detroit affects the Vikings season and their perception. I think it could be a little closer than you could expect against the Rams. I think this is going to be... It might look closer on paper than I think it's going to actually be. I feel like this is going to be a multi-score win for the Eagles at home against the Vikings. I feel like Minnesota, that loss says a lot about that team. If Sam Darnold can get back to the way he's been playing pretty much all season, I think that Minnesota can put up a really good fight. But if he struggles and they squeak by LA, I don't think it's going to happen. So I got the Eagles moving on to the NFC Championship game against Detroit. So here it is, the Final Four. The AFC Championship game and the NFC Championship game. This is going to be tough. These 4 teams, any 4 of these teams, could win the Super Bowl this season, especially if they get to this point. And so we start on the AFC side of things. Baltimore, Kansas City. In Arrowhead, a rematch of the season opener, where Isaiah Likely had 1 toe out of bounds, which saved Kansas City, saved the game for Kansas City, prevented Baltimore from tying it or going for 2 for the win, and then, proving a 1-0 and starting this a beautiful 15-2 campaign for the Chiefs. Funnily enough, this is the most they've won with Patrick Mahomes as the starter, and it's also maybe his worst season as a starter for Kansas City. But who cares? He's winning. And that's the thing. He's the only quarterback in this league that has been a proven winner time and time and time again. Most of the other great quarterbacks in the NFL right now, at some point in their career, or for their entire career, have struggled to win against playoff teams. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow even. Those 3 guys in common, especially on the AFC side, cannot beat Patrick Mahomes. That's the entire mission for the AFC this season. It was last season, it is this year, and it will be again next year. John Harbaugh has schemed this Ravens offense much more differently the last couple times against Kansas City than he has against literally any other team in the league. He abandoned the run against Kansas City last year in the AFC title game. And it felt like that again week 1 in the season opener after Derrick Henry, opened the game with one of the great offensive drives he's had this season. But I think if John Harbaugh doesn't get in over his head, doesn't overthink things, sticks to his game plan, and uses the talent that he has, the Ravens will come out on top. And at some point, the luck has to run out for Kansas City, you'd think. They've been extremely lucky this season. Isaiah likely having 1 foot out of bounds. The pass interference against Cincinnati. Winning a coin toss to then win in overtime against Tampa Bay. A blocked field goal against Denver. I could go on. There are so many other instances of them just kind of having a couple of lucky bounces. The Raiders fumbling a snap on Black Friday to avoid even just attempting a game-winning field goal. There's plenty of opportunities where you feel like this is the game that Kansas City's going to lose, but they have not. I think this is the one they lose. I think it is. And so, I have the Ravens in the Super Bowl this year. I think this is the year Lamar Jackson finally gets it done. And if he does win against Patrick Mahomes in the AFC title game and get to the Super Bowl, it will cement a third MVP honor for Lamar Jackson, which at that point pretty much almost cements a Hall of Fame career. But of course, him getting to the Super Bowl this year would pretty much further cement it, even more so if he won the whole thing. So I got the Ravens representing the AFC in the Super Bowl this year. I know, a long discussion about that one. And I think that one's got a lot more storylines just from past history than the NFC Championship does this season. Mainly, and I think the big storyline for the NFC side of things is just that the fact that the teams are really good. It'd be the number 1 and number 2 seeds in the NFC, 15-2, 14-3, 5 combined losses between the two teams. I think there's a lot to like about this matchup, just from a pure matchup standpoint. There aren't as many storylines. There isn't as much history between these two iterations of the Lions and Eagles as the AFC Championship has. But I think this is going to be a really, really good game as well. Detroit's at home. Philly's playing on the road. I think Philadelphia's had a phenomenal season. They've kept it close against some inferior competition a couple times this season. They haven't done it as much as of late. But I don't know if I'm overly confident in Nick Sirianni to get his offense prepared for this game. I feel like the Lions not only have a great head coach, they have a great offensive coordinator and great defensive coordinator. I feel like that coaching staff is out of this world and is going to do... I think regardless of how many injuries that defense has right now, I think the coaching wins this game for Detroit. Some classic Dan Campbell aggression. Who knows? Maybe they build themselves out to another 17-point lead, but I don't feel like they would blow it this time. They're going to learn from their mistakes from last season, and I think it's the Lions that get to their first Super Bowl in franchise history. And so the time has come. We have the Super Bowl matchup. The Baltimore Ravens and the Detroit Lions. A huge Super Bowl for both franchises. The Ravens looking for their third title in just under 30 years as a franchise. Remember, established in 1996 after their move from Cleveland. And Detroit, first Super Bowl appearance, chance for their first Super Bowl in franchise history. Been a team for over 90 years. They've got 4 titles to their name. 1 in the 30s, 3 in the 50s. But depending on who you ask, NFL championships apparently don't count as real championships. I disagree. I think you separate it between... I think Super Bowls are more valuable. But, I don't think you should just discredit as if the Lions have never won a championship. Because they have. They've won 4. They won 3 in the 50s. In some of those great matchups with the Browns of all teams, too. I mean, how about that? Wouldn't that be crazy to see someday? But enough about that. Who's winning the Super Bowl this year? The Ravens, on one hand, have some of the best skill position players in the league, including their quarterback, who at this point may have just won his 3rd MVP. But it also, that if he does, that could very well be a curse to not win the Super Bowl, because of course the NFL MVP has not won the Super Bowl since Kurt Warner did in 1999 with the Rams. So, could Jackson become the first quarterback in the 21st century to win the MVP and the Super Bowl in the same season? Who knows? On the other hand, Detroit, they're just a really complete team. It doesn't feel like they have the same star power that the Ravens do, but they utilize the guys on their team to a much greater efficiency than Baltimore has this season. Obviously, is shown by the fact that the Lions have won 3 more games. And I think that really reflects on the coaching staff. I really like what this Lions coaching staff has done, and I think this is the push year. This is the push year for the Lions because, of course, they very well might be losing their offensive and defensive coordinator to other teams this offseason. You want to make this one count. Obviously, you've made it count by making your Super Bowl, your first ever Super Bowl, but you want to cap it off with a title. It's going to be close. I think that there's a lot of these games where it just feels like it's a bit of a toss-up. Going to be really close regardless. But in the end, I have it being the Detroit Lions winning the Super Bowl. They win it all for their first ever title. Super Bowl 59 champions, first Super Bowl in franchise history, capping off one of the most successful successful seasons in NFL history. Of course, 15 wins and going all the way and winning the Super Bowl hasn't been done too much. But it's a huge one for the Lions. Their first ever title. Goff gets his Super Bowl. Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, they all accomplish what they set out to do at the beginning of the season after deciding to stay with the organization and not go out for head coaching jobs. Amon-Ra St. Brown, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, Aiden Hutchinson, despite being injured for the majority of the season, they all get their Super Bowl rings. There's a lot to like about this Lions team. And I think they get it done this season. So, what do you guys think? Who wins the Super Bowl? Is it the Lions? Is it the Ravens? Are you calling the three-peat for the Chiefs? Let me know in the comments below. Keep the conversation going. Also, let me know what you think of my playoff predictions. Are they stupid? Do you think I'm an imbecile? Go ahead and tell me in the comments. I don't care. Or you can tell me that I had a really great predictions. That'd be great too. I'd like some positivity. Anyways, there you have it. Those are my predictions for these NFL playoffs. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like on the video if you liked it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content from me. And I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.